They thought they could steal my land, hide behind rules, twisted by greed and power. A ruthless HOA president, armed with lawyers and influence, tried to bury me under fines, threats, and outright lies. But what she didn't count on was this: I'm not the kind of man who backs down. What started as a fight for my lake access turned into a war against corruption, manipulation, and greed. And the best part? The trap she set for me snapped shut on her instead. This is a story of revenge served cold, justice earned inch by painful inch, and a downfall so brutal you won't believe how it all unravels. Stick around, because what comes next will leave you speechless. Drop a comment letting me know when you're listening and where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I had lived at Lakeview Acres for nearly 10 years. The serene, glassy waters of the lake were my refuge, fishing at dawn, kayaking at sunset. My modest cabin sat on 3 acres of land, bordered by the lake on one side and thick pines on the other. It wasn't much compared to the lavish estates springing up all around me, but it was mine, a quiet slice of paradise far from the noise and greed of city life. I kept mostly to myself. I wasn't antisocial, just content. Most of my neighbors respected that. They'd wave when they drove by, and I'd nod back. Sometimes I'd help old Mr. Connors fix his fence or lend tools to the young couple trying to start a garden down the road. It was a community of sorts, but I'd always preferred my own company. Things changed when Victoria Huxley became the new president of the Lakeview Acres Homeowners Association. She was a woman in her late 40s, with the kind of face that suggested smiling was more effort than it was worth. Her family had money, old money, and she made sure everyone knew it. I'd heard the whispers about how she bought her sprawling mansion near the lake's north end for cash, the kind of move only the seriously wealthy could make. And it wasn't just the house. She seemed to have purchased power itself. Victoria had this way of imposing her will with a smile so tight you could hear her teeth grinding. She wanted Lakeview Acres to be perfect, or at least her version of perfect. Pristine lawns, manicured flower beds, luxury cars parked on spotless driveways. A place where appearances mattered more than character. I noticed the changes almost immediately. New rules posted on the community bulletin board by the post office, lawn maintenance standards, noise restrictions, architectural guidelines, the sort of micromanagement designed to preserve the integrity of Lakeview Acres, which really meant keeping it as pristine and sterile as possible. All of it signed off with Victoria's bold, looping signature. I ignored most of it. My cabin sat far enough from the main road that I rarely had visitors. HOA nonsense wasn't supposed to affect me anyway. My property wasn't even officially part of Lakeview Acres. That technicality never mattered before, not until Victoria showed up. One chilly morning in early spring, I woke up to the sound of hammers and metal clanging. At first, I thought it was just another neighbor getting some work done. But as I stepped outside, the racket seemed far too close. I followed the noise down the narrow gravel path that led to my private access to the lake. They were building a fence, a tall, metallic monstrosity, stretching across the only path from my property to the water. The workers, men in bright yellow vests, hammered poles into the earth and strung chain-link fencing from post to post. The structure was cold, industrial, and out of place in the natural beauty surrounding it. "What the hell is this?" I shouted. One of the workers looked at me, then shrugged and gestured toward a woman standing off to the side, clipboard in hand. Victoria Huxley herself. She wore pressed beige slacks and a tailored navy blouse that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her hair was pulled back tight enough to make her features appear even sharper than they already were. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice sugary and tight, as if she was trying to sound polite, but the effort pained her. "We're installing a privacy fence for the HOA's protection. Can't have just anyone wandering down to the lake." "Anyone? It's my goddamn property." I shot back. "I own the land right down to the water. That's my lake access. Your access cuts through community-owned property, she countered, with the precision of someone well-versed in bureaucratic nonsense. It's a liability. This fence is going up for the neighborhood's safety. The condescension in her voice set my teeth on edge. Safety from what, exactly? I've been using that path for years without any problems. No complaints? No issues? Well, Mr. Reynolds, she said, glancing down at her clipboard like she was reading from some sort of script, the board has recently reviewed access points to the lake and determined that your pathway poses a significant risk. We're simply enforcing the standards that make Lakeview Acres such a desirable community. I laughed bitterly. Desirable community? You mean a playground for the rich? This is about you not wanting to see my old cabin and gravel path from your mansion, isn't it? Victoria's eyes narrowed, but her smile remained fixed. I assure you, Mr. Reynolds, this decision is purely about safety and liability, nothing more. I glanced at the workers, their heads down as they continued their task, indifferent to the argument brewing around them. The fence was almost complete, stretching nearly 50 feet across my property's edge, blocking the only clear path to the water. And what if I tear it down? I asked. Victoria's smile widened, sharp and gleaming. That would be considered vandalism. And, as you know, Lakeview Acres has very strict penalties for such behavior. Her smugness was infuriating, but what made it worse was the knowledge that she'd likely planned for this. The fence, the workers, even the little speech she delivered, all of it prepared in advance like some kind of twisted theater. I watched them finish the job, the metallic clinks of chains and latches echoing through the crisp morning air. The path I'd walked for years was now blocked by a gleaming steel barricade. As the workers packed up their tools, Victoria offered me one last sickly sweet smile before turning on her heel and striding away, her heels clicking like gunshots against the gravel. I stood there long after they left, staring at the fence and feeling something cold settle deep in my gut. It was anger, yes, but also a creeping sense of dread. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. As the hours slipped by, I found myself pacing along the fence line, eyes tracing the cold metal links like I was searching for some flaw. But it was sturdy, built with the same precision as the mansions Victoria prized so much. It stood there, taunting me, a symbol of her power and arrogance. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white, the bitter realization sinking in. This wasn't just a fence, it was a message, and I had no intention of backing down. The first letter arrived 2 days after the fence went up. It was tucked neatly into my mailbox, sealed in a crisp white envelope with the Lakeview Acres HOA logo embossed on the front. I tore it open right there on the gravel driveway, feeling a knot of irritation twist in my chest before I even read a word. The letter was written with the sort of sterile professionalism that made my skin crawl. It informed me that I was in violation of several HOA standards, most of which were complete nonsense. Unauthorized structure encroachment, improper access to community property, non-compliance with aesthetic standards. The kicker was the fine. $200, due within 30 days. I crumpled the letter in my fist and tossed it into the bed of my truck. My property wasn't even part of their damned HOA. Victoria had to know that. But the nerve of her, trying to intimidate me with some flimsy piece of paper and an outrageous fine. I tried to forget about it, but the letters kept coming. One every few days, each more aggressive than the last. The fines doubled, then tripled. I'd wake up in the morning to find envelopes scattered across my porch, stuck under the windshield wiper of my truck, even pinned to my front door like some kind of twisted warning. I called the county office to confirm what I already knew. My property was outside of Lakeview Acres' official boundaries. I wasn't required to pay HOA dues. Never had been, never would be. The woman on the phone sounded puzzled when I explained what was happening. If your property isn't part of the HOA, they have no jurisdiction over you, she said. Yeah, try telling that to Victoria Huxley. I hung up, frustration bubbling under my skin. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following week, I woke up to the sound of an engine idling in my driveway. I peered out the window and saw a sleek black SUV parked next to my truck. Victoria stood beside it, arms folded, a thin smile etched across her face. I opened the door, leaning against the frame. "Morning, Victoria." "What's the pleasure?" She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Reynolds, you've ignored multiple violation notices from the HOA. I'm here to offer you a final opportunity to rectify the situation before we proceed with legal action." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Legal action? You don't have jurisdiction over my property. Never have. You can send all the letters you want, but I'm not part of your damn HOA. "That's where you're mistaken," she replied smoothly. "The board recently voted to expand the boundaries of Lakeview Acres to include all adjacent properties with access to the lake. As of last month, your cabin and the surrounding land are officially part of the community." "What?" The word came out sharp and brittle, like a branch snapping underfoot. "It's all perfectly legal," she continued, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "The zoning board approved the annexation. I have the paperwork right here." She held up a thick folder, her fingers pinched around the edges like she was afraid my property's dirt might somehow taint her pristine documents. My mind raced. I'd heard nothing about any zoning changes. No notices. No warnings. Nothing. "I never agreed to be part of your community," I snapped. "That's irrelevant," she replied. "The decision was made by the board and approved by the county. As of now, you are subject to all HOA rules and regulations, including fines for non-compliance." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, so damn confident, that it took me a second to realize what she was saying. This wasn't just about the fence. She was trying to bring me under her control, force me to abide by her rules. "You can't just redraw boundaries to suit your whims," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I assure you, it was all done by the book." She smirked, her eyes glittering with triumph. "But if you prefer to challenge the decision, feel free to hire a lawyer, though I doubt you'll find much success. The HOA's resources are substantial." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. "Get off my property!" Victoria's smile never wavered. She held out a business card, which I ignored. With a shrug, she slipped it into my mailbox before turning on her heel and marching back to her SUV. I watched her drive away, my blood simmering like water on the verge of boiling. This was no accident. Victoria had orchestrated the whole thing: the fence, the letters, the zoning changes. She wanted control, and she was willing to rewrite the rules to get it. For the next few days, I pored over county records, desperate to find any shred of evidence that would disprove her claim. But the paperwork was all there, neat and tidy, stamped with the county's official seal. Somehow, she'd managed to get the zoning board to redraw the boundaries to include my property. No one I spoke to at the county office seemed willing to help. The woman who'd originally told me I wasn't part of the HOA clammed up when I mentioned Victoria's name. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the fear. Whoever Victoria was connected to, they held power. But I wasn't about to roll over and accept it. The fines continued to pile up, each letter more threatening than the last. A certified notice arrived, informing me that my unpaid dues now totaled over $5,000. The HOA was preparing to place a lien against my property if I didn't comply. It was all part of her plan. Squeeze me until I had no choice but to fall in line or sell my land. Either way, she won. The worst part was the loneliness, the feeling that I was fighting against something so much bigger than myself. Victoria had the entire community under her thumb. Neighbors who once greeted me with smiles now avoided my gaze, their faces twisted with discomfort or indifference. Even Mr. Connors, the old man I'd helped more times than I could count, pretended not to see me when I waved from my porch. The isolation was suffocating, but beneath the frustration and anger, something else was growing. Determination. If Victoria thought she could bully me into submission, She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Things escalated faster than I expected. Victoria was relentless. It seemed like every day brought a new letter, a fresh fine, or some other ridiculous complaint she'd conjured up just to make my life miserable. I started collecting the letters, piling them up on my kitchen table until the stack grew thick enough to make the damn table wobble. They all bore the same embossed logo, the same formal language, the same veiled threats. She went beyond just piling on fines. Victoria was making her mission personal. I'd catch glimpses of her SUV parked near the end of my driveway, or her strolling along the edge of my property with her clipboard like some kind of self-appointed warden. The workers who'd built the fence would drive by in their trucks, slowing down just enough to shoot me smug, pitying looks before speeding off. I tried to ignore it, told myself she'd lose interest eventually, that this was all just some power trip that would fade once she found a new target. But that wasn't Victoria's style. She wasn't the kind of person who let go. The fines continued to grow. According to her letters, I now owed over $7,000 in unpaid dues, violation fees, and so-called administrative costs. And then, one crisp morning, I found something worse than a letter waiting for me. An official notice of lien. She had actually filed a lien against my property. It was real, notarized, stamped with the county's official seal. The paper trembled in my hand as I read it over and over, disbelief turning to fury with every passing second. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about her desire to bend me to her will, to force me to acknowledge her authority over me and my land. I couldn't let her win. I started making calls. Lawyers, property experts, zoning officials, everyone I could think of who might help me figure out how to get her off my back. Most of them were polite, but their words were always the same. Sorry, Mr. Reynolds. If the HOA has legal authority over your property, you're bound by their rules. But my property isn't part of the HOA, I would argue. It never has been. She just made it part of her damn empire without even asking me. Have you tried filing a complaint with the county? One lawyer asked. Of course I have. They all say the same thing. The HOA's jurisdiction has been expanded. The county approved it. Then you might be out of luck. It was maddening. Victoria had stacked the deck against me so thoroughly that no one even seemed willing to challenge her. Even the local real estate agents I contacted were hesitant to talk, their voices tight with worry as they danced around my questions. Eventually, I found someone who was willing to give me a straight answer. Her name was Sandra Brooks, an attorney who specialized in property disputes. She was tough, no nonsense, the kind of woman who spoke like she was perpetually cross-examining everyone she met. "Tell me everything," she said when I walked into her office, my stack of HOA letters under one arm and the lien notice clutched in my fist. I laid it all out for her, from the sudden appearance of the fence to the bogus zoning changes and the endless parade of fines. Sandra listened, her expression cool and calculating as she flipped through the documents I'd brought. "You're right about one thing," she said finally. "They can't just redraw boundaries without notifying you. Legally, you should have received notice about the zoning changes well before they were approved." "I didn't get anything," I said. "Not a single letter." "That's because they didn't send one," Sandra replied, her eyes narrowing. "I've seen cases like this before. HOAs can be ruthless when they want something. And this Victoria woman? She sounds like the worst kind of power-hungry bureaucrat." "So what do?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Sandra leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. "First things first, we need to get our hands on the official records. The zoning approval, the annexation documents, everything. If they didn't follow proper procedure, we can challenge the whole thing." It was the first hint of hope I'd felt in weeks. "And if they did follow procedure, then we find something else." "Trust me, Mr. Reynolds. Everyone makes mistakes, even control freaks like Victoria Huxley." I left Sandra's office feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. She'd promised to dig into the records, to find out exactly what Victoria had done and how she'd managed to rope my property into her web of regulations. Days passed with no word from Sandra, but I held on to the hope she'd given me. In the meantime, the harassment continued. Victoria seemed to double her efforts, as if sensing that I was preparing to fight back. She started visiting my property daily, usually with another board member or some lackey from her crew. They'd wander around my fence line, scribbling notes, taking photos, always with that damn clipboard in her hands. One afternoon, I caught her standing by the fence with two men I didn't recognize. They were dressed in suits, talking in low voices, while Victoria pointed toward my cabin like it was some kind of blight she needed to remove. I stormed over, anger propelling my steps. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victoria turned to me with that smug smile plastered across her face. "Just a preliminary inspection. The HOA is concerned about the state of your property." "My property is fine. It's you that's the problem, Mr. Reynolds," one of the men interjected, his voice oozing with false politeness. "We're here on behalf of the HOA to ensure compliance with community standards. Now, if you would kindly allow us to complete our inspection." "No." I stepped in front of him, arms crossed. "You're trespassing. Leave." The man's composure faltered, his gaze flickering toward Victoria for guidance. But she just smiled, her eyes gleaming with something close to amusement. "Have it your way, Mr. Reynolds," she said coolly. "But understand that your continued refusal to cooperate will only make things harder for you." They left eventually, their expensive shoes crunching against the gravel as they retreated to their cars. But I knew they'd be back. Victoria wasn't going to give up that easily, and neither was I. Sandra called me 2 weeks later with news that almost made me drop the phone. "You were right, Mr. Reynolds. They cut corners. A lot of corners." I sat up straighter in my chair, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "What do you mean?" Victoria pushed the zoning board to approve the annexation without properly notifying the affected property owners. Namely, you. Legally, you should have received a certified letter informing you of the proposed changes well before the decision was finalized. And guess what? No record of any such letter being sent to you exists. So, it was all bullshit? Pretty much. The HOA board's meeting minutes mention your property multiple times, but they conveniently skipped over the part about notifying you. I've also found something else that might interest you. Go on. There's a small strip of land directly behind the fence Victoria had built. It was part of an old commercial development plan that never got off the ground. It's not technically part of Lakeview Acres, and as of now, it's still listed as county-owned property. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning it's for sale. Cheap, too. It's narrow, about 20 feet wide, but it runs the entire length of the lake boundary behind your property. If you buy it, the fence Victoria put up would be sitting directly on your land. The implications hit me like a freight train. Victoria had gone to all this trouble to block my access to the lake, and here was a golden opportunity to pull the rug out from under her. "How do I buy it?" I asked, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I can put you in touch with the county office that handles property sales. It shouldn't take more than a few signatures and a modest fee." "Let's do it," Sandra laughed, a low, satisfied sound. "I thought you might say that. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow." The next day, I drove to the county office, my hands trembling with a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. Sandra had been right. The process was almost laughably easy. The property had been deemed non-essential by the county years ago and was practically being given away. For a mere $1,500, I became the legal owner of the narrow strip of land that ran behind the fence Victoria had erected. A ridiculous amount of money compared to the sheer satisfaction I felt when I left the county office. The deed clutched firmly in my hand. I wasted no time. The very next morning, I hired a contractor to install a reinforced iron gate right where Victoria's fence met my new property line. It was a beautiful piece of work. Black wrought iron with intricate designs and a thick, weatherproof lock. And the best part? Only the first had the key. The look on Victoria's face when she discovered the gate was priceless. I was out by the lake, hammering away at some new steps I'd decided to build leading down to the water, when I heard her screeching from the other side of the fence. "Mr. Reynolds!" I took my time standing up, wiping sweat from my brow as I sauntered over to the fence line. She stood there, her face twisted into a mask of fury, clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "What can I do for you, Victoria?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "What the hell is that?" she demanded, stabbing a manicured finger toward the new gate. "That? Oh, that's just my new entrance." It seemed silly to walk all the way around your fence just to reach the lake. Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just put up a gate wherever you want. That fence was installed under HOA authority." "Funny thing about that," I said, unable to keep the grin off my face. "Turns out you built your precious fence on land that doesn't belong to the HOA. It belongs to me. As of yesterday." She blinked, momentarily speechless. "That's impossible. That land is county-owned." "Was county-owned," I corrected. "I bought it fair and square. And according to the deed, your fence is now trespassing on my property. I suppose I could tear it down if I wanted. But I'm not unreasonable. The gate will do just fine." The silence that followed was delicious. For once, Victoria seemed at a loss for words, but only for a moment. "This isn't over," she snapped. "The HOA has rights. We will not tolerate unauthorized modifications that violate community standards. Good luck enforcing those standards on property you don't own." I gave her a mocking salute before turning and walking away, my laughter echoing through the trees. Over the next few days, I watched from my porch as Victoria made several more visits to inspect the new gate. Sometimes she brought along board members, their faces creased with worry as she lectured them and pointed accusingly at the iron gate. Other times, she stood there alone, her eyes blazing with fury as she scribbled furiously on her clipboard. She even tried calling the county office to contest the sale, but Sandra had made sure all the paperwork was airtight. Legally, I owned the land, and there wasn't a damn thing Victoria could do about it. Not that it stopped her from trying. I received more letters, more fines, more threats, but they all felt hollow now, like the desperate gasps of someone who realized they were losing control. I made a point of using the gate as often as possible. Every morning, I'd walk through it with my fishing gear slung over my shoulder, whistling cheerfully as I made my way down to the water. And every evening, I'd lock the gate securely behind me, the metallic click like music to my ears. Victoria continued her harassment, but for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had the upper hand. She could throw whatever she wanted at me, fines, complaints, legal threats. None of it mattered. I had the deed. I had the gate. And most importantly, I had the key. Victoria's retaliation was swifter and more vicious than I'd expected. If I thought buying the strip of land and putting up a gate would be the end of it, I was sorely mistaken. All it did was light a fire under her already overinflated sense of authority. The first sign of trouble came in the form of another letter, this one hand delivered by one of her lackeys. It was thicker than the others, crammed with legal jargon that made my eyes blur halfway through reading it. But the message was clear enough. The HOA was officially challenging my ownership of the land. They claimed the purchase was illegitimate, that the county had made a mistake in selling it to me, and until the dispute was resolved, I was to cease all modifications and refrain from using the new gate. I laughed when I read that last part. The gate was mine. The key was mine. And as far as I was concerned, Victoria could throw every piece of paper she wanted over the fence, and I'd still use the gate whenever I damn well pleased. But she didn't stop at letters. The surveillance began a few days later. It started small, just one of Victoria's little minions standing near the fence line with a clipboard and a camera, snapping pictures of me every time I used the gate. At first, I ignored them, waved at them even, just to piss them off, but the more I taunted them, the worse it got. Soon there were 2 of them, then 3. And then they started bringing tripods, video cameras, and even a drone that buzzed above my property like an angry hornet. I found myself glancing over my shoulder every time I walked to the lake. The feeling of eyes constantly watching, judging, recording, made my skin crawl. I couldn't enjoy the water anymore, couldn't fish in peace without the dull hum of the drone hovering just out of reach. And it wasn't just the cameras. Victoria began sending inspectors to my property, claiming they were there to ensure compliance with HOA standards. I turned them away every time, but the harassment was relentless. One morning, I found a citation tacked to my front door for unauthorized construction of a gate and pathway. I crumpled the notice in my fist and hurled it into the trash. As far as I was concerned, Victoria could choke on her own paperwork, but her tactics were starting to wear me down. I'd wake up to find my trash cans overturned, their contents strewn across my driveway like some kind of petty warning. Once, I even caught a pair of teenagers sneaking around my property with spray paint cans in their hands. When I confronted them, they bolted, leaving behind a half-finished message scrawled on the fence, "Get out." Every day felt like a battle. The phone calls from Sandra were my only solace. She was working tirelessly to dismantle Victoria's case, digging up every scrap of evidence that proved my purchase was legal and above board. But the process was slow, painfully slow. "They're throwing everything they have at this," Sandra told me one evening. "Victoria's got friends on the zoning board, the planning commission, hell, probably half the damn town council. But we've got something they don't." "What's that?" I asked, my voice rough with exhaustion. "The truth. And I'm not letting this woman steamroll you just because she's got more money than sense." Her words were encouraging, but they didn't do much to stop the sleepless nights. I'd lie awake, listening to the creak of the house settling, my mind racing with thoughts of what Victoria might try next. And then she made her biggest move yet. I was out by the lake, cleaning up some dead branches that had washed up on the shore after a storm, when I noticed something strange. The gate was open, not just unlocked, but swung wide, as if someone had forced it open and left it that way. My heart thudded in my chest as I approached, dread pooling in my stomach. The lock was still intact, but the chain had been cut clean through. A clean, precise cut, the kind that suggested bolt cutters rather than vandalism. I inspected the area, looking for any other signs of tampering, and that's when I found the papers. A stack of notices, all bearing the Lakeview Acres HOA logo, had been scattered across my property like confetti. Most of them were fines, citations for non-compliance, and unauthorized modifications. But one document stood out from the rest. It was a formal notice of eviction. According to the paper, the HOA had declared my property a public nuisance and had filed for immediate removal of all unauthorized structures, including my cabin. It was insane, outrageous, but the wording was crafted with enough legalese to make my head spin. Fury ignited in my chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was war. I stormed into the house and called Sandra, my fingers trembling as I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. "They filed for eviction," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. "They broke onto my property, cut my gate open, and left a goddamn eviction notice in my yard." Sandra's response was immediate and fierce. "They what?" "That's criminal trespass, not to mention destruction of private property." "Did you get photos?" "Yeah, plenty." "Good. Send them to me." This is exactly what we needed. Her confidence was a lifeline. But even as I snapped photos of the damage and sent them her way, a dark part of me wondered if Victoria's influence would overpower the truth. She had already twisted the system to her advantage once. What was stopping her from doing it again? I spent the next few days fortifying the gate, adding additional locks and even a security camera that I installed myself. The drone still hovered occasionally, but it didn't seem to approach as closely now. Maybe they were afraid of being recorded, but I knew this was just the beginning. Victoria wouldn't stop. Not until she'd broken me or I'd found a way to tear her down completely. And I intended to tear her down. Sandra's voice was sharp, urgent when she called me a few days later. "We need to meet. Now. I've got something that changes everything." Her words sent a jolt of electricity through me. I grabbed my truck keys and sped over to her office, my pulse pounding the whole way. Whatever she'd found, it had to be important. Sandra greeted me at the door, her expression more animated than I'd ever seen. She ushered me into her office and shut the door, her eyes glinting with excitement. "I've been digging into Victoria's background," she said, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "Turns out, your dear HOA president has some skeletons in her closet. Big ones." I opened the folder and flipped through the pages. They were copies of emails, property records, minutes from HOA meetings, and even personal correspondence that must have taken Sandra weeks to gather. But one document stood out from the rest. "This is a land purchase agreement?" I asked, squinting at the text. "Correct," Sandra said, her tone triumphant. "Victoria's been quietly buying up small parcels of land around the lake for years. Most of them were sold by owners who didn't even realize their properties had been annexed into the HOA's jurisdiction until they were drowning in fines. That's how she gets them," I muttered, feeling my stomach twist with anger. "She boxes them in with her rules and then buys them out cheap when they can't pay the fines." Sandra nodded. "It's a classic squeeze play, and she's been remarkably successful at it. But here's the kicker." She tapped a particular document, her finger resting on a highlighted section. "This land Victoria's been buying up, it's all tied to a commercial development plan she's been pushing for years. Luxury condos, waterfront resorts, a private marina, the whole 9 yards." I stared at her, the pieces clicking together in my mind. So all of this, the harassment, the fines, even the fence, it was about getting me out of the way. Exactly. Your property is one of the last pieces she needs to secure her development rights. And now that you've bought the strip of land behind the fence, you've become a major obstacle to her plans. My anger flared, hot and bitter. She's not just trying to ruin my life, she's trying to force me out so she can build some damned resort. "Pretty much," Sandra said, her eyes gleaming. "But she made a mistake. A big one." "What mistake?" "Victoria never officially disclosed her personal interest in the development plan to the HOA board. Legally, she should have recused herself from any votes or discussions related to properties that could potentially interfere with her business interests. But she didn't. Instead, she manipulated the board to push for annexations that would benefit her directly." "Conflict of interest," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "And not just that," Sandra added. "Fraud, coercion, abuse of power. I've got enough evidence here to bury her." The sense of relief was overwhelming. For the first time, it felt like the tide was finally turning in my favor. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Sandra leaned back in her chair, her smile as sharp as a knife. "We fight fire with fire. You're going to sue the HOA for harassment, trespassing, and illegal annexation. And we're going to name Victoria personally in the lawsuit." I felt a thrill run through me. How do we make it stick? We've got the paper trail to prove she pushed the annexation without proper notification. We've got witnesses who can testify to her underhanded tactics. And if the board members start realizing they've been duped into violating their own bylaws, they're going to turn on her to save their own skins. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It felt good to have a plan, to know I wasn't alone in this fight. Sandra filed the lawsuit the very next day. The response was immediate and explosive. Victoria's lawyer fired off a cease and desist letter, claiming my allegations were baseless and defamatory. Sandra shredded it without a second thought. Then came the offers. Thinly veiled bribes disguised as settlement proposals. Victoria was willing to drop all the fines, remove the lien, and even pay me a handsome sum if I'd agree to sell her my property outright. I refused every single one. The more desperate she became, the more obvious it was that we were hitting a nerve. And Sandra was relentless, her strategy meticulous. She had me gather every piece of evidence I could find. Photos, videos, documents, even the discarded eviction notices Victoria's cronies had tossed over the fence. I spent hours combing through my property, photographing the damage they'd done, the trash they'd left, the places where the fence had been tampered with. It was exhausting work, but it gave me something to focus on, something to fight for. The harassment continued, but now I saw it for what it was: desperation. Victoria was losing control, and she knew it. The HOA meetings grew increasingly contentious, with board members openly questioning her leadership. Sandra even managed to get a few of them to speak to us off the record. Their testimonies painted a damning picture of Victoria's obsession with controlling every aspect of the community. And then, just as things seemed to be reaching a boiling point, Sandra dropped the hammer. She filed a formal complaint with the county's ethics board, citing Victoria's undisclosed financial interests and her blatant manipulation of the zoning process. The complaint was backed by a mountain of evidence Sandra had compiled, enough to force a full investigation. The fallout was immediate. Victoria's pristine image began to crack. Rumors spread, whispers of corruption and greed tainting her once ironclad reputation. Even her allies on the board began to distance themselves from her, fearful of being dragged down with her. But the best part was the letter I received 2 days later. A letter from Victoria herself, begging me to meet with her to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution. I read the letter twice, the bitterness of her hypocrisy almost laughable. After everything she'd done, she actually had the gall to ask for mercy. But mercy wasn't on the table. Not anymore. I agreed to meet with Victoria, but not on her terms. She had suggested we meet at the Lakeview Acres Community Center, a neutral ground where she could maintain her illusion of authority. Instead, I insisted we meet on my property, right by the fence she'd been so desperate to control. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, her pristine white SUV gliding up my driveway like it owned the place. She stepped out wearing her usual uniform, pressed slacks, an immaculate blouse, and that ever-present clipboard clutched under her arm like a weapon. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice tight. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Wasn't sure I had a choice," I replied, folding my arms across my chest. "You've been hounding me for months. Figured it was time we cleared the air." She ignored the jab, her eyes flicking to the new iron gate that gleamed behind me. "I understand there's been some tension between us. I want to resolve this amicably, if possible." "Amicably?" I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "You've tried to find me into submission, filed a lien against my property, and now you're trying to evict me. I'd hardly call that amicable." Victoria's expression tightened, but she forced a smile. "I admit there have been some misunderstandings, but I'm willing to make concessions. If you agree to drop your lawsuit and cease your harassment of the HOA, I can arrange for the fines to be dismissed. And the lien can be removed immediately." She spoke like she was offering me the world, as if I should be grateful for her generosity. The arrogance was staggering. "Harassment?" The first shook my head. "You've got some nerve. You and your board members have been trespassing on my property, damaging my gate, and trying to bully me out of my own home. And now you're playing the victim?" Her smile faltered, but she kept her composure. "Mr. Reynolds, this kind of hostility benefits no one. My goal has always been to maintain the integrity of Lakeview Acres, to protect its value." "You mean to protect your investments?" I shot back. "Sandra found your little development plan. The condos, the marina, the luxury resorts. That's what all of this has been about, hasn't it? Forcing me out so you can turn this place into some overpriced playground for the rich." Victoria's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she regained her icy composure. "Whatever your attorney may have discovered, it's irrelevant. I'm offering you a way out, Mr. Reynolds. A chance to end all of this unpleasantness before it becomes truly destructive." "Truly destructive," I echoed, my voice dripping with disdain. "What's that supposed to mean? Another lien? More surveillance? Another bogus eviction notice?" "I'm simply trying to protect the community," she said, but there was a tremor in her voice now. "If you persist with this lawsuit, it could result in severe financial repercussions. For both of us. And for your little development scheme, I added, that's the real reason you're here, isn't it? You're worried I'll drag your name through the mud and ruin your precious plans. Victoria's face twisted into something ugly, her carefully maintained facade cracking under the pressure. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she snapped. I have connections, Mr. Reynolds. Friends on the county board, in the planning commission. This lawsuit will destroy you. Funny, I said, letting a smirk play at my lips. Because Sandra tells me it's already destroying you. She flinched, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear flicker in her eyes. What are you talking about? You think I don't know about the complaints filed against you? The investigations your little power trip has triggered? People are talking, Victoria. Even your precious board members are starting to question whether you're worth the trouble. That's ridiculous, she spat, her voice shaking. I've done nothing wrong. Everything I've done has been to protect this community. No, I corrected her. Everything you've done has been to line your own pockets. You manipulated the board, twisted the rules, and tried to bully anyone who stood in your way. And now, it's all coming back to bite you. She stared at me, her breathing shallow and quick. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Victoria, this could have been simple, I said, my tone calm but firm. You could have left me alone, but instead you declared war on me. So don't act surprised now that you're losing. Losing? Her voice was little more than a hiss. You think a few complaints will stop me? I've built this community from the ground up. I am Lakeview Acres. No, you're just someone who thought she could bend the world to her will, I said. But the thing about power is, once people realize you're just a bully, they stop being afraid. Her eyes darted to the gate, her fingers twitching against her clipboard. This isn't over. It is for me, I replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got better things to do than entertain your threats. I turned my back on her and walked away, my shoulders tense with the expectation that she'd lash out. But she didn't. When I glanced over my shoulder, she was still standing there, her face pale and her mouth pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Her SUV roared to life moments later, tires spitting gravel as she sped away. I watched her go, a strange sense of satisfaction settling over me. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but I'd gotten under her skin, shaken her composure, and that was worth something. When I called Sandra later that afternoon to recount the meeting, she laughed. You've got her rattled. Good. Desperation makes people careless. And careless people make mistakes. What's our next move? I asked. Patience, Sandra replied. Victoria's starting to crumble. All we have to do is keep the pressure on and wait for her to make the wrong move. I couldn't argue with that. Victoria had tried everything to break me, to force me off my land. But now the tables were turning, and I intended to see this fight through to the very end. Victoria's composure crumbled faster than I expected. Within days of our confrontation, rumors began spreading through Lakeview Acres like wildfire. Neighbors whispered about secret meetings, underhanded deals, and violations of the very bylaws. Victoria had been so ruthlessly enforcing, and Sandra's lawsuit was like gasoline on the flames. The first blow came from within her own board. 2 members resigned in quick succession, citing philosophical differences with Victoria's leadership. But I knew the truth. Sandra had already contacted them, offering immunity from the lawsuit if they cooperated and provided testimony about Victoria's manipulative tactics. They were only too eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. But the real trouble for Victoria began when the County Ethics Board announced a formal investigation into her actions. Apparently, Sandra's complaint had been thorough enough to leave them no choice but to dig into Victoria's financial dealings, her real estate transactions, and her manipulations of the zoning board. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of the investigation. Reporters started showing up at Lakeview Acres, their vans lining the main road like vultures circling a carcass. Neighbors who'd once looked away when I waved now stopped by my property to offer their support. their faces pinched with worry and curiosity. "She's gone too far this time," said Mrs. Evans, an elderly woman who'd lived in the community since its inception. "I heard she's been trying to force people out for years." But nobody wanted to speak up. "Why not?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Fear," Mrs. Evans replied, her voice trembling. "Victoria has friends in high places, and she's made life miserable for anyone who dared to question her authority." "Not anymore," I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. "She's losing her grip, and once it's gone, she's got nothing." The investigation progressed rapidly. It turned out Victoria had been far sloppier than she realized. For years, she'd used her influence to push through zoning changes that benefited her real estate ventures, often without properly notifying the community. Sandra fed me updates almost daily. Every new discovery was like another brick added to the wall we were building against Victoria. "She's desperate," Sandra told me during one of our calls. "Her lawyer reached out today, practically begging for a settlement. They're willing to drop all the fines, the liens, everything. And they're offering you a hefty sum of money to walk away and drop the lawsuit." "Let me guess," I said, grinning. "Victoria wants to buy my property?" Bingo. "She thinks she can throw money at the problem and make it disappear. What did you tell them?" "I told them to shove it." Sandra laughed. "This isn't about money, Mr. Reynolds. It's about justice. And about making sure Victoria never does this to anyone else." Her words resonated with me. Victoria's harassment had nearly broken me, but now the tables had turned. And I wasn't about to let her wriggle free just because she could afford to pay me off. I made a point of attending the next HOA meeting, knowing full well that Victoria would be there. The community center was packed, the air thick with tension and curiosity. Victoria stood at the front of the room, flanked by the remaining board members, her face pale and drawn. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice wavering slightly, "I understand there have been concerns regarding the recent investigation. I want to assure you all that Lakeview Acres remains a safe, welcoming community under responsible leadership." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, skeptical and unimpressed. "We are cooperating fully with the County Ethics Board," Victoria continued, her eyes scanning the room like a hunted animal searching for escape. "And I am confident that this matter will be resolved quickly and professionally." "Is that why you've been trying to buy out Mr. Reynolds?" someone shouted from the back. "To cover your own tracks?" Victoria flinched, her smile faltering. I might have made efforts to reach an amicable resolution with Mr. Reynolds. Unfortunately, he has chosen to pursue legal action rather than a reasonable settlement." "A reasonable settlement?" I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I rose from my seat, my voice steady and clear. "You tried to force me off my property, Victoria. You filed a lien against me, trespassed on my land, vandalized my gate, and then tried to cover it all up with lies and manipulation." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Victoria. Her composure was disintegrating by the second. "Everything Mr. Reynolds is saying is true," said another voice. Sandra. She'd come to the meeting as well, armed with stacks of documents and a steely determination. "The County Ethics Board has already confirmed multiple violations of zoning protocols and improper annexation procedures, not to mention undisclosed financial interests that directly conflict with her duties as HOA president." Victoria's face went ashen. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "An attempt to destroy my reputation and undermine everything I've built." "No," Sandra countered calmly. "This is accountability, something you've been avoiding for a long time." The crowd erupted into chatter, voices overlapping in anger and confusion. People were demanding explanations, demanding Victoria's resignation, demanding justice. One of the board members, a man I recognized as Robert Harris, stood up and addressed the room. "It's clear that serious mistakes have been made. And if the investigation proves wrongdoing, then those responsible must be held accountable. Effective immediately, I am calling for an emergency vote to remove Victoria Huxley as president of the Lakeview Acres HOA. The room burst into applause. Even some of Victoria's former allies clapped, their expressions resigned and weary. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Whatever power she'd once held over these people was evaporating before her very eyes. I locked eyes with her, a cold satisfaction blooming in my chest. This was what justice looked like. Not revenge, but the truth finally surfacing despite her every effort to bury it. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, Sandra approached me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "That went better than I expected." "Is she finished?" I asked, my voice low. "Not quite. But this was a big step. If we keep pressing, she won't have a leg to stand on." "And the investigation?" "It's only getting started," Sandra replied with a grin. "And from what I've seen so far, Victoria's past is full of skeletons just waiting to be unearthed." I glanced back at the community center where Victoria stood alone, her shoulders hunched and her face pale. She had tried to destroy me. Now, it was her world that was falling apart, and I wasn't done yet. Victoria's downfall didn't happen overnight, but once the cracks started to show, they spread like wildfire. The ethics board investigation dragged on, sifting through every shady deal, every underhanded maneuver Victoria had made over the years, and there were plenty to uncover. Sandra kept me updated almost daily. The more she dug, the worse it got for Victoria. Emails surfaced showing her pressuring zoning officials to push through annexation requests without proper oversight. Minutes from board meetings revealed how she'd manipulated votes, coercing members into supporting her development plans under threat of fines and penalties. Even her own allies began to abandon her. One by one, board members resigned, their names dragged into the mess she'd created. Some of them tried to distance themselves from her outright, claiming they'd been duped or misled. Others simply vanished, hoping to avoid the fallout. But Victoria remained, stubborn, defiant. She continued to fight the lawsuit, her legal team throwing every possible defense at us. They claimed I had violated community standards, that my use of the gate was a safety hazard, that I had trespassed on HOA property. Sandra tore their arguments apart piece by piece. Every accusation was met with solid evidence proving the opposite, and with each victory, Victoria's defenses crumbled a little more. But it wasn't enough, not yet. I wanted her gone. Not just from my life, but from Lakeview Acres entirely. One afternoon, Sandra called me with a tone of triumph in her voice. "We've got her." "Got her how?" I asked. My curiosity piqued. One of the board members finally agreed to talk. Robert Harris. He's been on the board for years, but he's fed up with Victoria's bullying. And he's willing to testify. What did he say? He confirmed everything. The coercion, the manipulation, the threats, and, most importantly, he has proof that Victoria lied about the zoning annexation. She forged signatures on the approval forms. My jaw tightened. That's not just unethical. That's illegal. Exactly. And with Harris's testimony, we can file criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit coercion, you name it. Once the county board sees this, they'll have no choice but to act. It was the news I'd been waiting for. All the months of harassment, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, it was all finally going to pay off. "Let's do it," I said. "File whatever charges you need to. Make sure she pays for every single thing she's done." Sandra's voice was calm but firm. "I will. And once this is over, you'll have your life back, free of her and her damn HOA." But even as the legal wheels began to turn, Victoria continued her campaign of intimidation. Letters still appeared in my mailbox, though they'd become more desperate, more hollow. Fines, eviction notices, threats of foreclosure. It was as if she believed sheer persistence could win the day. I ignored them all, What mattered now was the legal process, the slow and methodical dismantling of everything Victoria had built on lies and manipulation. The ethics board issued a formal subpoena for Victoria's financial records. She fought it tooth and nail, but her own lawyer eventually caved under the mounting pressure. When the records were finally released, they painted a damning picture. Victoria had been funneling money from the HOA's accounts into her personal real estate ventures. Not only was she using her position to manipulate zoning laws to her advantage, but she was also embezzling funds from the very community she claimed to protect. The media ate it up. News stations ran stories detailing the corruption scandal at Lakeview Acres, complete with interviews from disgruntled residents and legal experts predicting Victoria's inevitable downfall. Even her supporters, the few she had left, couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence. They began to turn on her, their voices joining the chorus of outrage, demanding her resignation. Through it all, Victoria remained defiant. She held press conferences where she insisted she was innocent, that she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by greedy developers and disgruntled residents. But her words fell on deaf ears. Too much had been revealed. Too many people had suffered under her rule, and now they wanted justice. The final blow came when Sandra filed the criminal charges. It was a bold move, but one entirely justified by the evidence we had gathered. Fraud, embezzlement, coercion, forgery. The charges were stacked so high that even Victoria's most loyal allies couldn't defend her. I was sitting on my porch one morning, coffee in hand, when I saw the sheriff's car pull up to Victoria's mansion. She stormed out to meet them, her face twisted with rage and desperation. But it didn't matter. The law had finally caught up to her. They led her away in handcuffs. The image burned into my mind like a brand. I called Sandra as soon as the sheriff's car disappeared down the road. "It's over," I said. "It's not over yet," she replied. "But we're damn close. The criminal case will take time, but the HOA is already holding a vote to remove her from her position. I doubt she'll survive it." "She shouldn't," I said. "She's done nothing but abuse her power from the start." "She'll be gone soon," Sandra promised. "And once she is, we can settle the lawsuit and make sure you're free of her once and for all." I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight dance across the lake's surface. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Victoria was finished, her power broken, her influence shattered, and all that remained was to pick up the pieces and rebuild what she had tried so hard to destroy. But I wasn't going to be satisfied with just her removal. She had tried to ruin me, to break me down until I had nothing left, and I intended to make sure she faced the consequences for every single thing she had done. Sandra had warned me that the legal process would take time, that I needed to be patient. But after everything Victoria had put me through, I was willing to wait. The wheels of justice were turning, and for once, they were turning in my favor. The day Victoria was officially removed as president of the Lakeview Acres HOA felt almost anticlimactic. The board held an emergency meeting following her arrest, and the vote to remove her was unanimous. The only people who showed up in her defense were her lawyer and a few of her old allies, all of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her mansion sat dark and empty. The pristine white SUV was gone, her carefully manicured lawn overgrown with weeds she'd once fined others for having. Rumor had it she'd sold the house to cover her mounting legal bills and fled the state to avoid the embarrassment of a trial. But the charges weren't going away. Neither was the mountain of evidence Sandra had built against her. The County Ethics Board concluded its investigation a month later, issuing a scathing report that detailed Victoria's abuses of power, financial misconduct, and manipulation of zoning regulations. Their findings were forwarded to the district attorney's office, and soon enough, the formal indictment followed. Victoria Huxley was facing more charges than most career criminals. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery, coercion. The list went on, and every single charge carried weight, thanks to the meticulous work Sandra had put into building the case. But that wasn't the only victory. The HOA, desperate to distance itself from Victoria's corruption, reached out to me with a settlement offer. It was a substantial sum of money, meant to cover all the fines and fees they'd unjustly imposed on me, as well as compensation for the stress and damages I'd endured. Sandra pushed for more, threatening to drag the entire board into the lawsuit if they didn't cooperate. By the time the dust settled, the HOA had not only paid me a generous settlement, but had also agreed to legally separate my property from their jurisdiction. My land was officially recognized as independent from Lakeview Acres, protected from any future attempts at annexation. The gate I'd built remained, sturdy and untouched. The key was still mine, and mine alone. But the most satisfying part of all was knowing that Victoria's empire had crumbled. Her plans for the luxury condos and waterfront resorts had fallen apart the moment her corruption was exposed. Investors pulled out, angry residents threatened lawsuits of their own, and the development companies she'd partnered with wanted nothing to do with her. Sandra and I celebrated the finalization of the settlement over drinks at the local bar. She raised her glass, a triumphant smile on her face. "To victory," she said. "To justice," I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. The lawsuit was officially settled. The charges against Victoria were proceeding through the courts, and the HOA had been forced to clean house. New board members were elected, ones who promised transparency and fairness, but I didn't care much about their promises. As far as I was concerned, their influence ended where my property line began. I spent the next few weeks repairing the damage Victoria had caused. New paint on the cabin, fresh gravel laid along the driveway, and the installation of more security cameras just to be safe. Neighbors who once ignored me now stopped by to apologize, some even offering to help with the repairs. I accepted the offers from a few of them, more out of courtesy than need. My trust had been shaken, and it would take more than friendly words to rebuild it. But there were a few who proved genuine. Miss S. Evans brought me homemade pies every Sunday, her wrinkled hands shaking as she set them on my porch. "You showed them all what it means to stand up for yourself," she said with a proud gleam in her eye. Robert Harris, the former board member who had testified against Victoria, came by to offer his apologies. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted, his shoulders sagging with regret. "But I was afraid. She had everyone convinced that crossing her was a death sentence." "She's gone now," I said, "and I'm not holding grudges. You did the right thing when it mattered." He nodded, relief evident on his face. "If you ever need anything, just let me know. I owe you that much." But the biggest surprise came when Sandra called me out of the blue, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "The new HOA board wants to meet with you. Apparently, they're trying to repair their reputation and want your input on how to make things right." "I've got nothing to say to them," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "I figured you'd say that," Sandra laughed. "But listen, they're offering to sponsor a community event in your honor, a way to acknowledge everything you went through and how you stood up to Victoria's corruption." "A community event?" I echoed, half amused, half skeptical. "Yeah. They want you to lead a workshop on property rights, zoning regulations, all that stuff. Turns out you've become something of a folk hero around here." The thought was almost laughable. Me? A hero? I'd just been fighting to keep what was mine. But maybe that's all a hero really is. Someone who refuses to back down when everyone else tells them to. In the end, I agreed to the workshop, not because I wanted recognition or praise, but because I wanted people to understand what Victoria had done, to make sure something like this could never happen again. The event was a success. People from all over the community showed up, eager to learn and listen. Sandra spoke about the legal aspects of what had happened, while I shared my story, the harassment, the lies, the fight for my own damn land. When it was over, I shook hands with people who'd once treated me like a nuisance. Even some of the new board members approached me, their expressions earnest and apologetic. But what mattered most was the freedom I'd earned, the knowledge that no one would ever try to take what was mine again. As the sun set that evening, I sat on my porch, watching the lake shimmer beneath the orange glow. The air was crisp, cool, the way it always was this time of year. I held the key to my gate in my hand, turning it over slowly, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Freedom, justice, peace. Victoria was gone, her empire had crumbled, and I'd won. The lake was mine, and nothing would ever change that. The story of my battle against Victoria Huxley and her corrupt HOA wasn't just about defending a piece of land. It was about standing up to injustice, refusing to be bullied, and fighting for what's right, even when the odds seemed impossible. It taught me that persistence, integrity, and the courage to face down powerful adversaries are what truly matter. For those of us who have lived long enough to see our fair share of unfairness, it's a reminder that justice is worth fighting for. Bullies like Victoria thrive on fear, manipulation, and intimidation. They count on people being too tired, too scared, or too broken to fight back. But as I learned, their power crumbles the moment someone has the courage to say, enough. It doesn't matter if you're defending your home, your dignity, or your peace of mind. What matters is the will to stand firm when it counts. The road may be difficult, and victory may not always come quickly, but the fight itself is worth it. It's a lesson I hope my story imparts to anyone feeling overwhelmed or powerless. If you found strength or inspiration in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to support more content like this. Your engagement helps spread these powerful messages of resilience and justice. And remember, it's never too late to take a stand. Stay strong and fight for what you deserve.